The house had been quiet for so long, too long, some would say. The silence had become a part of the walls, the floors, and the very air that filled the rooms. It was a presence that had settled in, so familiar that no one questioned it anymore. Except for Emily. She had felt it from the very first moment she stepped inside, the weight of the silence that hung in the air, thick and unyielding. It wasn't the kind of quiet you could ignore. No, this was the kind of silence that spoke in whispers, in pauses, in the spaces between breaths. It had started 20 years ago, when Emily was just a child. She had been full of wonder, her eyes wide with curiosity about the world around her. And at the center of it all was her grandfather, John, the storyteller. His voice, deep and rich, had carried stories of his youth, adventures that took Emily to faraway lands, tales of love and heartbreak that made her believe the world was a grand stage, waiting for her to step onto it. But then, one day, his voice had gone silent. It happened without warning, without explanation. One moment, Grandpa John had been sitting at the kitchen table, his face lit by the soft glow of the morning sun, listening as Emily chattered about her day at school. The next moment, his mouth had closed, and his eyes, those bright, sparkling eyes, seemed to lose their spark. They looked at her, wide and confused, as if searching for something. But no words came. At first, Emily had thought it was a joke. Maybe he was playing with her, pretending to be silent. But when she saw the sadness in his eyes, when she heard the stillness in the air, she realized something had changed. Something had been lost. She asked him questions, tried to make him laugh. But he only stared at her with a sadness that spoke louder than words ever could. Doctors couldn't explain it. They ran tests, suggested strokes, or perhaps a psychological trauma. But none of their answers brought comfort. The silence remained. It was a presence that grew with each passing year, creeping into the corners of Emily's heart, leaving a hollow space where her grandfather's stories once filled her soul. As the years went by, Emily learned to adapt. She would sit with him, beside the old armchair where he always sat, staring out the window at the garden he once tended with such care. And though he never spoke, there were moments, fleeting moments, when their eyes would meet, and Emily could feel the unspoken connection between them. It wasn't the same as before, but it was enough. Or so she thought. Now, 2 decades later, Emily had grown into a young woman, with dreams and ambitions of her own. She had come home every weekend, sitting beside him in silence, speaking to him as if the words would somehow reach him. But this weekend, something felt different. As she stepped into the house, a subtle change in the atmosphere struck her. The stillness that had once ruled the house seemed to be holding its breath. The curtains, usually still, fluttered slightly in the breeze from the open window. The faint scent of freshly baked bread lingered in the air, something her mother rarely had the energy to do these days. Emily's heart skipped a beat. The house was different. She was different. "Mom?" Emily's voice was tentative, echoing in the empty hallway. Her mother looked up from the stove, a surprise crossing her face. The weariness that had settled in over the years softened for a moment as a flicker of a smile appeared. "Emily, you're here early today." "I felt like coming home sooner," Emily replied, her voice betraying the anxiety that pulsed under the surface. She turned her gaze toward the living room. "Is Grandpa okay?" Her mother's smile faded slightly, and a shadow passed across her face. "He's been acting a little strange today. I think something's different." Emily's heart pounded, a rush of excitement and fear flooding her chest. She had heard those words before, but today they felt heavier, more significant. She hurried toward the living room, the air around her thick with anticipation. And then she saw him. Grandpa John was standing by the window staring out into the garden. For the first time in years, he wasn't seated in his chair. He stood there, motionless, as if the world outside had suddenly become a distant memory. His hands trembled slightly as they rested at his sides. Grandpa? Emily called softly, unsure of what to expect. The moment she spoke, the silence seemed to deepen, as though the entire house was holding its breath. For a long moment there was no response. The seconds stretched on, unbearable, as if the world itself had paused. Then, slowly, Grandpa John turned his head. His eyes met hers. There was something in those eyes, something she hadn't seen in years, a flicker of recognition, a spark of the man she remembered, the man who had once filled her world with stories. He shuffled toward her, his movements slow, deliberate, as though every step took a